Hello and good afternoon. This is Chris Pinchick with McFarland Stanford and the Grow Group. Excited for you to join us today for our Finish Strong webinar, 3 Winning Strategies for 2024. So very excited. For those of you who were able to join us yesterday, we did this live. We had a few technical issues with regards to the recording. So gonna give you another shot at this where we're going to do this. We're going to record this for you guys so that we can get this all out to you and that you can have all this information that you can review with your teams, your operations, your managers, and your owners. So want to welcome you again. This is the Finish Strong 3 Winning Strategies for 2024. And we're excited to see what we're going to do this year. And we're excited to see kind of how you're wrapping up the year in 2023, what that's going to mean for your success as we move into 2024. So if you are here and you're looking at what 23 looks like, and maybe you're frustrated, maybe you've run into some challenges and some struggles this past year, 23 was a year that was full of brand new challenges. We had a lot of increasing costs. We dealt with a lot of labor struggles and shrinking margins. So if you're here, you're in the right place. If you struggle with keeping clients happy, justifying your price increases and searching for new ways that you could show value, well, good news, you're in the right place. If you felt like you were just trying to keep your head above water and growth slowed to a crawl, or maybe growth just stopped in 2023. Well, good news, you're in the right place. And we're going to talk about a lot of that today because now is the time to do business differently. And so what we're focused on today are what are the things that are going to make you successful for 2024. And so to quickly introduce myself, my name is Chris Pinchick. I work with McFarland Stanford. I'm one of the partners at McFarland Stanford. Our business exists to support you guys and you gals. And so what we are here to do is to help you operate in a way that you have not been able to operate before in the past. And we're excited to see how we can help you grow. So at McFarland Stanford, we do a variety of things. From peer groups, we facilitate peer groups. We also do financial services. We've got recruiting and bookkeeping. We also do coaching and consulting services. And so we're here to help support your needs and your growth. And so I hope from what we're going to talk about today and some of the things that we're going to go through that you'll learn some of those things. So quickly to introduce myself, my background is actually in horticulture and landscape design. I studied out of Texas A&M, have a bachelor's of science in horticulture landscape design, and cut my teeth working in the industry, first originally on the project management operations side, spent a lot of time working out on crews, working on the back ends of shovels, before moving into sales, operational management. Eventually was able to be part of the executive staff on a firm where we grew from 4 to about 32 million before we launched into our consulting business at McFarland Stanford. And so I've got 3 little girls. I've got a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old now, 9-year-old, an 11-year-old, a beautiful wife that we own and operate a chiropractic wellness neurology center in Dallas. And love to spend my time actually doing landscaping and doing horticulture. So I am that weird guy that actually, as much as I would love to get rid of it, I'm still very much involved with it. And so we're going to talk about some of my experiences, some of the things that we've seen. And first, I'd like to dive into what were some of the trends that we saw in 2023. So ultimately, what we saw in 2023 and at the end of 2022 is, I can tell you, I think we're at the end of the post-COVID boom, and so what we're seeing is the transition from what we sell, how we sell, and the manner in which we're selling has gone from very much a just pick up the phone, answer the call, to now we're back to active selling mode. We've got to figure out ways to be creative. We got to figure out ways to build relationships. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about recurring cash flow models. This year, more than ever, we have more people calling our practice asking us for help on how do I create recurring cash flow models that are going to allow me to be successful as I move into 2024 and beyond, and how can I create better cash flow opportunities that are going to allow me to grow my business, grow my people, grow my teams, and look for ways to explore that. So whether that's Christmas decor, whether that's pest control, whether that's turf and tree and fertilization, whatever that it is, let's figure out how we find that low-hanging fruit. That was one of the biggest things I think that's come from the 2023 explosion that we saw as business owners were learning how to adjust to what active selling looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about salaries and expenses and what that's done over the past year and how those continue to rise. And what is that doing to the impact on your bottom line? And how is that bottom line being affected whether that's jobs we priced 18 months ago, jobs that we're pricing now, or jobs that we're going to be pricing for 2024 and 2025. But what are those salaries and expenses going to do if they continue to rise? We're going to talk a little bit about portfolio management. Portfolio management became a critical topic of conversation in a lot of our peer group meetings this past year. It became a huge piece to our accountability calls. And as we really dove into portfolio management, what we started to look at is who are the people we want to work for? Who are the people that we were most successful with? And ultimately, what are we going to do to make sure that we're driving success as we move into 2024 based on those portfolio margins? And then finally, embracing tech platforms to manage hours. Never before have we seen the explosion with technology like we saw in 2023. I mean, Aspire, LMN, you name the software, you name the robotic mower, you name the platform, whether it's Bamboo, HR, every technology platform can be touched in some aspect of your business. And we're starting to see this throughout every organization that we're working with in our peer groups. And so excited to talk about that a little bit more about what that meant to business owners and landscape operators in 2023 and how that's starting to affect us as we move into 2024. And so with that, I'd like to start with a quick little survey. And so I'm going to put up a question here. When we move to salaries, what I want to think through here is on a rating of 1 to 10, 1 being, did your salaries not increase or have your salaries increase along with the rates? How competitive are your rates? So think about that question. When we did this live, what we saw was majority of our responses landed in, I'd say they were 6, they were 7s, few 8s. And so it told us a lot of stuff. And what we found with that kind of echoes a lot what we've seen on our recruiting practice, which is basically, you know, salaries have increased. Do we think business owners are keeping up with those? We do. Why do we know that? Because the roles that we are placing all across the country have really mimicked a lot of what we've seen. You know, so as salaries increase, as employees have been asking for more money, as employees have started to realize what it was going to be to raise those incomes to keep up with those inflation booms, what we found is our recruiting costs ultimately we're having to align with that. And so as we were placing these roles, we were seeing those dollar values start to be, we saw account managers go up by close to 10%. We saw project managers go up by at least 3%. And when you look at irrigation techs, my gosh, 2 years ago, we were paying $15 to $18 for a good irrigation tech. And now we're lucky if we can find an irrigation tech that's under 25. I would say going rate now that we're seeing across the board is we're seeing anywhere $25 to $32 an hour for an irrigation tech. And so, oh my gosh, how are we seeing that impacting our industry? We're seeing it impacting it in a tremendous way. And so it's very important for us to think about that. So now let's move to our second question. Let's talk a little bit about contracts. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how tight would you say your contracts are? So when we saw this, when we asked this question yesterday on our live webinar, what we found was we were kind of in the 7 to 8 range. I think when we started to ask this question, a lot of people felt like their contracts were pretty tight and feeling like, yeah, you know, I feel pretty good about my contracts, which is why we weren't seeing the ones, we were seeing some higher numbers. But as we really started to explore this, as we went through our webinar, what we found was ultimately contracts really were having some holes that could be improved. We saw a lot of opportunity. A lot has changed in what we do with regards to warranty practices. A lot has changed in what we're doing with regards to onboarding a new client, or maybe when and how we're going about perennial change outs. You know, what are you doing to really tighten the language with regards to qualifications, exclusions, all the typical language that you typically see that maybe we just glaze over, but how do we ensure that our businesses are protected in a way with our contracts by just tightening up that language a little bit? And so we're going to talk a little bit more as we go through this presentation today about that. And so then finally, I'd like to move to our last question that I want to pose just to kind of get you thinking as we start to get things moving. Is your P&L rating? How well do you truly know your numbers? And so when I say how well do you truly know your numbers, what I'm thinking through is P&L, profit and loss. How often are you pulling that out of your QuickBooks file? How often are you sitting down with your direct reports and reviewing these financials? How common is it for you to stand in front of your team and tell them what and how you're producing and what that means for your success within an organization? And I chuckle a little bit when we got these responses yesterday. There was overly confident answers with, I do this at a 9, I do this at a 10. And it's been really funny to see as we walked through our presentation yesterday, how I'm pretty sure we left a pretty big impression that how some of those 9s and some of those 10s probably started coming in around a 6, maybe a 7 as we walk through our conversations. Because when we asked some questions, what we found is that the knowledge that came out through some of our conversations was that, man, maybe we don't know the numbers quite as tightly as what we thought, and maybe we don't know exactly how inflation on different material and line items have affected our business. And so what we want you to talk about is we want to really focus on in 2024 at knowing your numbers. The most successful businesses in 2024 is going to be the business organizations that not only the business owner is focused on knowing these numbers from a profit and loss standpoint, but the managers are knowing the numbers from a profit and loss standpoint. The person that can impact that change the most is the person who's doing the work. So let's talk about what some of those key challenges are for 2024. As we look at what our key challenges are for 2024, what I'm going to tell you is number one, labor. Labor has always been the number one challenge for us in the landscape industry. It will currently continue to be the number one challenge for us in the landscape industry. And as inflation is driving price increases up, managing through these labor challenges is going to be something that we're going to really talk about. Number two, sales. Sales how are we going about actively finding work? We talked about actively selling work versus just answering the phone calls from 23 to 24. And so this is going to be a big year as we start to talk about sales and adding new revenue streams and creating those relationships. And then finally, number three, profitability. Price increases and salary increases are ultimately driving what that profitability looks like in your organization. And so it's going to be important for us to really focus on what labor is going to do, how are we going to impact those labor line items, what sales is going to do, how are we going to impact those sales line items if we ultimately plan on changing what profitability looks like in our organizations. So let's ask the question, what's your number one goal for 2024? So for many of you, when we talk about what your number one goal is for 2024, it may be profitability, it may be sales, it may be labor, but ultimately what I'm going to push you for is in 2024, I want to see us focus on streamlining what labor looks like. I want to start to look at what is it going to mean to really tighten up what our direct labor versus what our indirect labor looks like. How do we start to manage by the line item? How do we start to manage by the hour? And how do we start to educate our teams on what that crew average wage really means? What's included in that crew average wage? And how do we start to impact those line items by controlling the cost that we're putting in on these projects? And most importantly, when we start to think about what it means to strengthen sales, that's directly correlated to what streamlining labor looks like. Are we giving our teams enough hours in the project to be successful in that project? If I give them 10 hours to do the job and it takes them 20 hours to do the job, the first question I should be asking myself is not, what are my teams doing to just blow hours on this job? But it's, if I blew it by that much, what am I doing from an estimating perspective that I'm that far off? If I bid it at 10 and it took 20, then am I looking at something different, or the team's really that inefficient? This is something that we can do from a sales perspective that can really drive that streamline of that labor that we're really trying to focus on. The other thing when we're talking about strengthening sales, we have to talk about what relationships means. We have to really focus on, if active sales is what we're after, then ultimately focusing on the relationships is something that we're going to talk about a lot. And our next couple slides are really going to dive into this. And then finally, improving the margins. Ultimately, labor, sale, they ultimately will all result in the improvement of the margins. But ultimately, if we can't improve these number one and these number two, then you can bet number three is not going to change. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about key one. Let's focus on labor first. Ultimately, we got to pay the right people what they deserve. We talked about earlier how salaries increased dramatically in 2023. We talked about how on our recruiting side, how that has become such an impactful part of what is done to our overhead line item that's impacting our contracts, our bids, our prices, and that's going to continue to impact us as we move into 2024. So the salary increases, They are the new reality. What I can tell you is I think we got away with this as an industry as a whole, is that I think we were behind market value. And for a long time, we were behind market value in a big way. And I remember being part of a presentation probably about 5 years ago. It was a software presentation, and I'll never forget them talking about what it meant to have the $100,000 account manager. And I remember sitting there thinking, this sounds absolutely ludicrous. At that time, account managers were making anywhere from $45,000 to $55,000. And the thought of having a $100,000 account manager sounds like insanity. Fast forward 5, 6 years later, I will tell you, we're starting to approach that. Are we quite to that $100,000 mark yet? No, we're not there yet. But is there an opportunity that we might get there in the next 3 to 5 years? I would say it's very highly likely. So how do we start to prepare for that now? How is that going to impact what labor means for us? Ultimately, technology. Technology is what we're using to solve a lot of these challenges. No longer should you be having to go to all of these different properties to inspect your controllers. Products like Weathermatic offer you tremendous opportunities to be able to touch all of your controllers at every property all the time, with ever having to leave an office, with ever having to leave an office computer, a desk, or maybe you're just doing it from your cell phone. But how do we start to use technology to leverage our account managers up, leverage our project managers up, where they can ultimately do more with less? Subcontractor annual reviews. Right now, if you haven't started thinking about this, this is something I am talking about a lot in our accountability calls. It's a thing that I'm focused on a lot right now with what the future looks like as we look at 2024. Because why? Subcontractors give us that flexibility to grow our organizations and do those things that will allow us to flex and grow without increasing our overhead costs. And so what do I like to do with subcontractor annual reviews? Right now is when I like to take all the work that I've done with these subcontractors in 2023 and just do some simple evaluations. Where were we successful with you last year? Where were we not successful with you? How much work did I bid with you in 2023? How much work did I award to you in 2023? How did we perform on that work? What type of margins do we get on that work? How was our cash flow and AR process with collections for you? How did we do getting you paid? How do I sit down with these subcontractors and start to have these conversations? Why? Because I can build those relationships with these subcontractors and continue to fill their pipelines, fill their books of business, and ultimately in turn, allowing me to grow my business in a way that isn't going to impact my overhead line items. And then as my business starts to grow, then I can start to look at retaining some of these things in-house and still be able to retain my subs so that I can continue to get that growth. And then finally, 2024, you should be people planning. When we're talking about people planning, right now I'm working with our recruiting team. We're putting all of our people plans in place for all of our ACE peer groups. We're starting to look at what people planning looks like with all of our clients and what that's going to mean for them. Now, people planning means a lot of different things to different people. But right now, if you're not actively interviewing candidates and you're not actively looking to hire for those roles that you're going to need in 2024, what I can tell you is you're behind the curve. Right now, when it's slow, that's when you should be focused the most on trying to fill those needs. So the question is, what are those needs? What are the things that you're going to need come snow season? Many of you, that's right now. How many of you would love to have another guy driving a snowplow on the roads right now? How many of you are sitting behind a truck, sitting in that truck, wishing you had those people? Well, right now, you should be making those interviews. In fact, you should have been making those plans a month and a half ago. Well, guess what? Spring's right around the corner. When spring hits, how many of us as landscapers want to be sitting there trying to be focused on trying to hire, trying to go through interviews? I had a great coaching call with somebody earlier today, and they said, man, I don't want to interview this person. Well, the question is, why are you not going to interview this person? You're going to need them because you're planning to grow your organization this year. So if you don't have time to interview them now, are you going to have time to interview them come April 15th? No chance, right? So people planning, find those holes, identify those challenges, figure out what you're going to be doing to solve those needs. And we encourage you to start trying to figure that stuff out now and get ahead of it. Get a month and a half so you can start training. Had an interesting conversation with Jason Crowley. Jason Crowley is one of our fellow ACE members, and he had a great quote that he gave to us. We were on borrowed time as an industry, has been underpaid for a long time, and COVID really did a good job of getting us right again. And you know what? Jason Crowley is 100% correct. We were fortunate for a long period of time to be able to, I would say we took advantage in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways now, inflation has forced us to right-size that ship in a lot of ways to rectify what salaries look like within our organizations. You know, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's the way it is. And the good news is we know it's here, we know it's not going to change, and you can be planning for that right now as you're getting your contracts geared up for 2024, as you're putting those proposals out to bid, as you're starting to think through what 2025 salaries and wages are going to look like. Right now is we need to be asking these questions and start to put those factors into place as you're getting those things prepared. Let's move to key point number 2 as we move into sales. We talked about sales as the number 2 thing that we wanted to focus on for 2024. And I'm going to tell you the number 1 thing with regards to sales. And I will tell you, me with my background in business development, spending years working on the sales side, doing a tremendous amount of coaching on behalf of our firm and working with Marty and our sales boot camps, we are going to push you and encourage you to really focus in and dial in on relationship growth. What is relationship growth? It's getting to know the people that you're bidding work for. It's getting to know your customers. It's asking for those referrals. It's engaging with those people that you did not win work with and starting to ask that question, because the work is no longer coming to us. And if the work is no longer coming to us, we've got to find ways to be creative to go after it. And if we're going to go after it, we have to find ways to set ourselves apart. And so if we're going to set ourselves apart, we need to refocus our sales and marketing cycles. And so if we're going to refocus our sales and marketing cycles, we've got to think, what has worked for us in the past? What has not worked for us in the past? What are the ways we can adapt what our marketing is going to look like to make sure that we're successful? You know, one of the things I like to coach a lot on with our peer group programs is that if you are currently in just maintaining brand mode, and I will tell you, this is coming from a sales perspective, I'm not a marketing person by trade, but I would tell you that if you're maintaining a brand mode, I would tell you that you should be spending at least around 1% of revenue for your marketing budget. What is that 1% going to? It's probably going to developing relationships. It's going to lunches. It's going to branding. It's going to signs. It's going to trucks. You know, and if you're looking to grow a brand, maybe you're moving into a new market, maybe you're moving into pest control, maybe you're moving into trees and fur, you know, maybe you're trying to expand into something you've never done before, then I would say that you should plan on probably a 2 to 3% spend as a percentage of revenue. Why do I like to say those numbers? I would tell you my numbers are probably a little bit more conservative than most, because I am focused on relationships. And so marketing is a tool to help me get things in the door. It's a tool to help get our name out there and get recognition. But I have never wanted to rely on marketing as my sole solution to making the phone ring. Am I encouraged and excited when that phone does start to ring? 1000%. But am I going to expect for that to solve my challenges? If I spend 3 to 6% or I spend 10% on marketing and those phones aren't ringing, yeah, I'm going to be a little bit itchy. I'm going to be wondering, but I can tell you, I know a lot of people that spend that kind of money on marketing and the phone still doesn't ring. So how do we focus on relationships to really make sure we're dialing it in? And let's talk about awarded versus non-awarded jobs. This is something I really like to talk about with regards to sales. Right now, we're sitting here in December. You should know, what are we closing out for 2023? What of those contracts we sold are going to land in 2024? How much of that can we consider contracted, forecasted backlog that I can put in a schedule? I can start planning my crews, planning my production, planning my buyouts now. How do we start to look at those awarded jobs versus those non-awarded jobs to make sure that we're going to be successful going into 2024? And then most importantly, how do I identify the holes? You know, do I currently have holes in March? Do I currently have holes in August? Or do I currently have holes in November? Those are good questions to start asking yourself right now if we're going to be successful for 2024. I can't tell you how often I sit on these coaching calls and people say, man, we've already sold $2.5 million worth of work for 2024. And I say, well, that's great. When's it all going to hit? And they're going to like, it's going to hit in March. Well, that's awesome. How many crews do you have? I have 2. That's not good. That's going to be a problem. How do we figure out where those bottlenecks are right now so that we can start getting ahead of the conversations from a relationship standpoint to drive what those conversations are going to be to make us successful in the future? And then finally, new revenue streams that can fill the gaps. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but when we're talking about new revenue streams, what is the low-hanging fruit that we can take advantage of? You know, if we have 100% of our clients that we're happy with, that's not the case, right? We always know there's going to be a bottom 10% that is probably taking a large portion of our time. What is that bottom 10%? What are we spending our time on? And in that top 80, 90%, what are we spending our time in? What are the opportunities on those job sites? Is it irrigation repair? Is it Christmas decor? Is it added features such as trees and fert? Or is it fertilization? Or is it pest control? What are those things that we haven't capitalized on that we can make sure that we're starting to educate our managers on, that we can be successful in as we go through 2024? What I would encourage you is start looking at what those managers are focused on, start looking at how they performed in relation to their goals for 2023, start looking at it from a quarter to quarter basis, break that down into a monthly basis, and then I'd break it down into a weekly and daily basis. Start looking at what those numbers mean, and then roll those over to 2024. You could put a factor of 3 to 10% on there as an expected of growth, and that's a safe number that we typically see, that we like to coach to, that you should expect out of all of your managers across the board from a sales perspective. So to quickly move on to Mike Weinberg. Mike Weinberg is a phenomenal author that we have the great privilege of not only knowing, but getting to work with, and having spent some time with Mike. One of my close colleagues, David Amigo, actually knows Mike very well and was courteous enough to make the introduction to us. And Mike was fortunate enough, he was able to join us on our Roots of Success podcast a couple weeks ago. If you haven't gotten to check out our Roots of Success podcast, I encourage you all, go check it out. It's phenomenal. Tommy Cole, my colleague, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, I've been working with since 2008, has a phenomenal interview there with Mike Weinberg. And I would encourage all of you to check that out. Mike Weinberg is somebody that I've read all of his books. I'm a huge proponent of his. He had a great quote here. He says, "It was easy when clients were throwing work at you. Order taking or simply fulfilling demand is a very different skill than creating demand." And Mike could not be more correct. And so what Mike's going to focus on in a lot of his books, and a lot of the philosophy that I run by with regards to landscape sales, and that I know Mike elaborates and talks in greater detail about, and that we like to coach in our ACE peer groups, is that the relationships, it's the creating the opportunity. It's not only creating opportunity now, but it's creating the opportunity for the future. What are you doing now to create relationships that are going to drive people to your team in 2024, building the bench? What are you going to do in the future that's going to create opportunities to drive new work, new relationships with general contractors, new builders, and new, let's just say, landscape architects? Who are those people in your circle of influence that you worked with last year, that you did work with, that we can start to follow up with now to make sure that we can be successful with them in 24, and then take it to the next step? That's what we want to really be thinking about. And so Mike does a really great job of just kind of summarizing what that means. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to check out his books, I would say certainly check out his books. He's got some phenomenal ones there. Definitely get on the podcast with Roots of Success with Tommy, and you can hear a great interview there where Mike really walks you through it. Our second key point, profitability. How do we create value and cut waste? Ultimately, by cutting waste, we can create more value. And so how do we do that? Well, we want to go back to that knowing your numbers. It's looking at that P&L. My favorite line item at every profit and loss statement that I've ever looked at every organization is tools and miscellaneous supplies. You can bet that if I've been to your organization and I've gotten a chance to go through your P&L, the number one line item that I'm going to look at is your tools and miscellaneous supplies, because it tells me everything I want to know with what and how you're operating your business. Because if I see things in there, it's going to tell me how much control do you have in how you spend. It's going to tell me what you're spending on. It's going to tell me the manner in which you're checking these items, or what knowledge do your management and your staff have at what and how this business is operating from a financial metric standpoint. And so what am I ultimately talking about? I'm talking about your cost of goods, and cost of goods are way up. And so when we talk about managing by the line item, we're talking about how crucial it is to managing each one of these aspects of your line item. Labor, indirect versus direct, tools and miscellaneous supplies, fuels. All of these things are going to be those things that have gone up over the last year with regards to inflation. Inflation is shooting through the roof. We've had to make our adaptations with regards to our contract renewals and try to get these prices up. But guess what? We haven't been able to keep up at the rate at what inflation has done. Hopefully this is kind of come down for us soon, but it's important for us to know what those are. And when I start to talk about COGS, what I want to know is, what does standard Mondo cost for all my projects? If I'm a project manager and I do high-end residential, and I'm doing that in the state of Texas, I know exactly where I'm going to buy that standard Mondo. I know exactly how much I probably bought last year, and I'm probably going to buy the same amount this year. So am I doing anything different to start to look at maybe partnering with the growers to see what it's going to be to contract grow maybe 60% of that, maybe 70% of that to get my cost per pot down? Or am I looking at how I can change shipping or change freight to change my delivery rates? Maybe I'm looking at a holding yard of how I can hold some of this stuff and irrigate it to have it ready for job sites. But what am I doing on the line item specifics, whether that's an estimate, whether that's a maintenance project, whether that's a job, that we can really dial in these specific cost of goods to help us impact not only the bottom line as an organization, but the bottom line on individual jobs. If I can drive bottom line profit on every individual job, or at least 50% of these jobs, you're going to start to see noticeable change in your profitability as an organization. Price increases. I ultimately think more price increases are likely. We've gone up significantly over the last 18 months. Many of us have already gone to 2 or 3 price increases. For those of you who have not gone up in price, unfortunately, that ship has sailed and you're already behind the game because you're not going to be able to catch that back up. But what I can tell you is expect that it might do it again. That being said, I personally feel like we're starting to reach that ceiling. As a salesperson, I always want to know where that ceiling is. And so I encourage everybody, you keep bumping that price until you start to see the pushback. And when you start to see the pushback and you start to hit that point, that's when you know, now I'm ready to start stagnating, bringing it back down to a point to know that we've hit that point. And until we know what that point is, which I think we're starting to hit, I'm starting to see this with more of my coaching calls as we're starting to look at what these price increases have done, is that customers are finally starting to say like, whoa, this seems a lot. I mean, you went up on me last year, we're going up again. What is changing? What's the impact? Why? Talk to me about it. But guess what? Let's be prepared to have those conversations, because the more we are to have those conversations, the more we can start to educate our clients. Not saying we're going to get away with another price increase, but I do think if you haven't caught up yet, there may still be some room. But if you feel like you're starting to hit that ceiling, you're starting to get that pushback from your customer, that's a good spot to be, because now we know we're at least there, and that's great. So at the beginning, we talked about loose contracts. So let's quickly talk about what loose contracts mean. Loose contracts are the things we lose money on. I install pools, and I install pools in Austin, Texas. When I install pools in this part of town, we found that there's sandy loam equivalent and I can dig a pool and there's no issues. When I install pools in this part of the community, I find that it's straight limestone bedrock, and we're going to have rock hammers and rock saws out here if we're going to get a foot into the ground or 6 inches in the ground. But what we got to know is what am I doing in a contract perspective to protect myself from that? And for those of you, whether you're in East Texas, whether you're in Cincinnati, Ohio, whether you're in Bozeman, Montana, what those things are that have impacted your estimates, that have impacted you throughout the year. Maybe it's a warranty line. Maybe it's an irrigation line. Maybe it's the fact that we went in and we've been doing warranty replacements too quickly after the snow melt, and maybe I need to talk to my customers about what that looks like from a warranty perspective to communicate with them, maybe in March, to let them know, hey, warranties are going to happen. We're going to be on your property to take care of these things. But when we do that is typically at the end of April, first part of May, or maybe that's April 15th. Designate what that is, but communicate that with your customer. Why? Because those warranty line items, by going in there too early, they're going to cost you money. We know perennials take a little while when they're hardening off to come back out of dormancy. So give them time to do that. But before you do that, don't leave your customer wondering. They're not the horticultural expert. You are. So communicate to them what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why that's a reason for being effective. And then ultimately, let's use that to be successful. And then finally, the annual contract analysis. As a sales professional, if you aren't or don't have an annual contract analysis, you're missing the boat. I will tell you, this is something that is standard for every sales operation that I've ever worked for and led. And what I will tell you is it's looking not just at the jobs we won, but more importantly, looking at the jobs that we lost. And when I'm looking at the jobs we've lost, what I want to know is why did we lose the job? Did I lose the job? I didn't lose the job just because I wasn't the low bid, right? If I lost a job, did I lose it because my irrigation line was high, because my soil excavation and grading was high, or maybe it was just the way I included my irrigation bid? Whatever that is, I want to know so that I can make impactful changes to specific line items, not global line items. If you're thinking you're going to win work just by lowering your price, That's the wrong way to go about this. We can't drive profitability by just lowering our prices. But if we can identify what are the challenges in an estimate, then we can start to really focus on what's going to make us most successful. And then finally, profitability is not just about bidding the work carefully and cutting expenses. It's also about building lasting relationships with clients and subcontractors to create the value. So when I'm doing my annual contract analysis, what am I ultimately doing? I'm identifying the challenges that I want to go back, talk to my customer about, talk to my general contractors about, talk to the home builders about. Hey, last year we bid $50,000 worth of work with you. We won $10,000 worth of work with you. In that 50,000, that included 10 other jobs. You awarded us one. Here's how we performed on that job. Here's how the communication went. Here's how we felt like you did in communicating with us. Here's how we felt like billing went. Here's what we would like to see out of 2024. Here's how I think we can make some manageable changes to be more effective in how we bid for you, how we estimate for you. Here's the challenges I found in our irrigation line that I think we can change, that are going to make and allow us to do better in 2024. That's going to make these estimates make a lot more sense for you, so we can make sure we're more competitive. So our line item outbid is going to make a lot more sense. And so when you are making those decisions on behalf of your client, you know you can confidently go in knowing that you're selecting us, making the right decision on behalf of your company. So as we wrap up, I ask you the question: where are you going to focus for 2024? Is it going to be labor? For many of you, it will. Is it going to be sales? Sales is going to be a challenge for all of us this year. So is that something we're going to focus on for 2024? Or finally, is it going to be profitability? So what I ask you today is pick one. Take a look at what's going to impact your business the most. And let's start to really think about some of the things we talked about today that are going to set you up for success. And if you want to learn more about how maybe we can help you with some of these labor, these sales, and these profitability challenges, what I'd encourage you is reach out to us, connect with us. We facilitate peer groups on behalf of McFarland Stanford and the Grow Group. We've currently got 15 groups and over 160 ACEs that work in our program. We're looking to grow that program in March, and we're going to be hosting our next ACE Discovery March 20th through 22nd in 2024. And we encourage you to be part of that. We have a phenomenal group of ACEs that are doing some incredible things. And through that program, we've been able to see some tremendous growth walking alongside these business owners as they grow their organizations from 200, 300, 500,000 to over 85, 90 million. And so it's been exciting to watch these business owners grow, not only personally, but professionally. And so if any of these challenges were challenges for you in 2023 and you want to figure out how to get past that in 24, we encourage you to reach out and see how you can be a part of our ACE Peer Group program. Some other resources: Marty Grunder and I have had the privilege of working together for many, many years. We host the virtual sales boot camps. We do 4 of these a year. And we're going to be doing our next one on December 13th and 14th. So if some of your questions got answered today, I encourage you to dive a little bit deeper. And on on December 13th, we encourage you to be part of that, where Marty and I are going to go into a 2-day workshop. We're going to really start to dive into the intricacies of what sales success looks like for 2024 and the things you can be doing as a business owner to make sure you're making impactful changes for the next season. And so we've got a great discount code for you there. I've got that on the code for you right there. If you want to check that out, we encourage you to take a look at that. And if you want to find out more information, just follow that link to the website and it'll take you right there. And I mentioned it earlier, my friend, my colleague, Tommy Cole, oversees our Roots of Success podcast. We could not be more excited about what this podcast is doing for the landscape green industry and what Tommy's doing to help lead business owners and operations people to success as they start to move into 2024. As I mentioned, Tommy and I have been working side by side. We had a desk starting in 2008, probably about 3 feet from one another, and we've stayed about that close ever since. And so Tommy's one of my best friends, probably one of the best operations project managers and one of the best entrepreneurs I've ever met in my career. And so I'm excited to be walking alongside Tommy, and want to encourage all of you, if you haven't been able to check it out, go check out our Roots of Success podcasts. They drop regularly, and you'll see that on all of our social media as you start to check it out. Once again, if you'd like to learn more about our recruiting, our staffing, certainly we'd love for you to check that out. Financial services, we're doing some incredible stuff with learning and teaching business owners on how to manage their finances to get that profitability they're ultimately due. So if you'd like to learn more, certainly reach out. And with that, I'd love to thank you for joining us. Sorry for the technical difficulties yesterday, but excited that we were able to get this recorded for you so we can get this out to you all again today so you can share this with your teams and your managers. We look forward to seeing you in 2024. We look forward to seeing you at our ACE Discovery in March, and we look forward to success for all of you this year. Thank you.